I want to be careful about how I tell this, because I've already learned what happens when you're not careful. I've learned what happens when you say the wrong name in the wrong room, or when you ask a question that nobody else thinks needs asking. So, I'm going to be precise. I'm going to use dates where I can remember them, and approximate where I can't. And I'm going to try very hard not to sound like someone who has lost his mind, because I haven't. I don't think I have. But I'll admit that the distance between I haven't and I don't think I have has gotten wider over the past 7 months, and that gap is where most of this story lives. I work at Belfield Grange Academy. I've worked here for 4 years. I'm the assistant registrar, which means I sit in a windowless office behind the main reception, and I maintain student enrollment records, attendance logs, transfer documentation, medical clearance forms, and the database entries that connect all of it together. It is not interesting work. I want to be upfront about that because I think people assume that if you work in school administration and you start noticing strange things, you must be the kind of person who's looking for strangeness, who's bored and imaginative and prone to making patterns out of nothing. I'm not that. I chose this work because it is structured and contained, and because I like the feeling of a record that balances, a system where every student has a number, and every number has a student, and those two things always correspond. They used to correspond. It started on September 14th. I know the exact date because it was the day I ran the first enrollment audit of the academic year. This is routine. Every September, about 2 weeks after the start of term, I pull the active enrollment roster and cross-reference it against the attendance registers that the form tutors have been submitting. The purpose is simple. Make sure that every student who's supposed to be here is actually here, and flag anyone who's been marked absent for more than 5 consecutive days without a parentally approved reason. It's housekeeping. It's one of the least consequential things I do. The roster that year listed 824 students across years 7 through 13. I printed it out because I've always preferred working with paper when I'm cross-referencing. You can lay it flat and run your finger down. And there's something about the physical motion that keeps me focused in a way that scrolling doesn't. I had the attendance sheets from all the form groups stacked on my left. I had a green pen for confirmed matches and a red pen for discrepancies. I put on the small desk radio I keep tuned to classic FM because the office is very quiet, and silence, when it goes on long enough, starts to feel adversarial. And I began. It took about 2 hours to get through years 7 through 11. There were the usual small issues. A student in year 8 whose last name had been misspelled in the database as Peterson, when the attendance register had Peterson. A year 10 student who'd been absent for 6 days, but whose mother had apparently called the front desk rather than emailing. So the absence was excused, but hadn't been formally logged. Normal things. The kinds of small frictions that exist in any system maintained by human beings. I started on the year 12 registers at about 2:30. Mrs. Calloway's form group, 12C. I ran my finger down the enrollment roster, matching names to her attendance sheet, ticking them off in green. Adams, Barker, Cho, Danforth, Ellis, Garrett, Huang, Irvine, Jackman, Keene, Liddell. Moreno, Nash, Osei, Price, Quinn, Rafferty, Salter, Travers, Underwood, Vickers, Walsh, Young. 23 students. Mrs. Calloway's attendance sheet listed 22. The missing name was Liddell. Thomas Liddell. I checked twice because this is what you do. I lined up the enrollment printout next to the attendance register and went through both lists name by name, and Thomas Liddell was on the first and not on the second. I made a note of it in red and moved on, because at that point it was just a discrepancy, and discrepancies are what the audit is for. I finished the rest of year 12 and all of year 13 without finding anything else notable. Then I went back to my flagged items. the misspelling, the unlogged absence, and Thomas Liddell. The first two I resolved in about 10 minutes each. Then I pulled up Thomas Liddell's record in the database. He had a full enrollment file, full. Date of birth, March 3rd, 2008. Home address, 14 Dunmore Road. Parents, Gerald and Susan Liddell. Emergency contact, Susan Liddell with a mobile number. Previous school, St. Anne's Primary. Then, Belfield Grange from year 7. Attendance history going back 5 years, mostly clean, a few scattered absences. Academic transcript with predicted grades. He'd chosen history, English literature, and politics for his A-levels. There was even a scanned copy of his year 7 school photo, a small boy with light brown hair and a slightly too large blazer. What there was not in any of this was a withdrawal form, no record of transfer, no record of permanent exclusion, no death notification, which is a form I've only ever had to process once and which I sincerely hope to never process again. According to every piece of documentation we held, Thomas Liddell was an active student at Belfield Grange Academy. According to Mrs. Calloway's attendance register, he didn't exist. I emailed Mrs. Calloway. I kept it simple, the way I always do with these things, because form tutors are busy people and they don't want to read 3 paragraphs when 1 sentence will do. I wrote, "Hi Janet, running the September audit. Can you confirm Thomas Liddell is still in your form group? He's on the enrollment roster but not on your attendance sheet. Might just be a clerical slip. Thanks, Marcus." She replied the next morning, "Hi Marcus, I don't have a Thomas Liddell in my form group. I think there might be a database error. Possibly a student who left before term started. Happy to check my records if needed." I read that email and I felt something, not alarm exactly, but the faint prickle of a system not balancing. Because students don't leave before term starts without paperwork. That's the whole point of the paperwork. If Thomas Liddell had been withdrawn over the summer, there would be a form signed by a parent or guardian, a note from the head of year, a database entry marking his status as withdrawn, with a date and a reason code. There was none of that. His status was active. His record was complete. He simply wasn't on the register of the form group he was supposed to be in, and his form tutor had never heard of him. I did what I would normally do in this situation, which was to walk down the corridor and knock on the door of the main office to speak with Linda Frome, the school's data manager. Linda has been at Belfield Grange for 11 years, and there is no aspect of the school's record keeping that she doesn't have either direct access to or institutional memory of. If a student had been quietly withdrawn for some sensitive reason, a safeguarding issue, a family situation, Linda would know. She was eating a sandwich at her desk when I came in, and she gestured for me to sit down while she finished chewing. I explained the situation. I said there was a year 12 student on the active roster who didn't appear on any attendance register and whose form tutor didn't recognize the name, but who had a complete enrollment record going back to year 7. Linda frowned. She put her sandwich down and turned to her computer and asked me to spell the name. I did. She typed it in. I watched her screen from the side. I could see the search results populating, and then she clicked on the top result, and Thomas Liddell's record opened up. The same record I'd been looking at the day before. "Huh," she said. She scrolled through it. She opened the attendance history, and the academic transcript, and the enrollment form. She checked the status field, which still read active. She checked the date of last attendance, which was listed as July 18th, the last day of the previous academic year. "That is strange," she said. "Let me make a few calls." I went back to my office. About an hour later, Linda came and found me. She had a slightly puzzled look on her face, The look of someone who's encountered a minor bureaucratic oddity and can't quite resolve it, but isn't yet worried. "So, I called the number listed for his mother," she said. "It's disconnected. I tried the address in the system, 14 Dunmore Road, and it doesn't come up on the council's database. I mean, Dunmore Road exists, but there's no number 14. The street only goes up to 12. "What about his previous school?" I asked. "St. Anne's?" "I haven't called them yet. I'll try tomorrow. Honestly, Marcus, I think this is just a legacy record that should have been cleaned up. You know what it's like. Sometimes records get stuck in the system after a student leaves and nobody updates the status. It happens. It does happen." She was right. It does happen maybe once a year, usually with a student who leaves mid-term for a reason that gets handled informally, a family moving abroad suddenly, or a student transferring to a PRU without the full paperwork being completed. It's annoying when it happens, but it's not sinister. I told myself it wasn't sinister. Linda called St. Anne's the next day. She came to my office afterward, and this time the puzzled look had deepened into something I might describe as professionally uncomfortable. "They don't have a record of him either," she said. "I spoke to their office manager. She checked their system going back 10 years. No Thomas Little." "That can't be right," I said. "We have his transfer paperwork from St. Anne's in our files. I've seen it." "I know," Linda said. "I'm looking at it right now." She held up a photocopy. I could see the St. Anne's letterhead, the signature of their head teacher at the bottom. "But they say they've never heard of him." We stood there for a moment, both of us holding different pieces of a thing that wouldn't fit together. Then Linda said, "I'm going to flag it for Mr. Alderton, that's the deputy head, and let him decide how he wants to handle it. It's probably just a filing error that got compounded over the years. These things happen." These things happen. People keep saying that to me, or things like it. It's a phrase I've come to dread, not because it's wrong, but because it's the phrase people use when they've decided to stop looking. Mr. Alderton, to his credit, did not say, "These things happen." What he said, when I was called to his office 3 days later, was that the matter had been referred to the local authorities' records team, and that they would investigate the discrepancy and resolve it, and that in the meantime, I should simply remove Thomas Liddell's record from the active enrollment roster and reclassify it as status pending review. He said this in a tone that made it clear the conversation was finished. I reclassified the record. I moved on. Except I didn't move on, not entirely because of the photograph. Thomas Liddell's Year 7 school photo was still in the system, a small JPEG attached to his enrollment file. A boy of about 11 years old, brown hair, a slightly lopsided smile, the green and gray striped tie that all Belfield Grange students wear. I'd looked at that photo several times during the audit process. It was a real photograph of a real child. I do not know how to explain this next part without sounding like exactly the kind of person I told you at the beginning that I'm not, but I felt something when I looked at that photograph. Not recognition, because I'd never met the boy. Something closer to responsibility. Here was a child who, according to every system designed to track his existence, was supposed to be in our care, and he wasn't. And no one could tell me where he'd gone, and increasingly, no one seemed interested in asking. I set it aside. I focused on my work. October arrived, and with it, the half-term assessments, which generate an enormous amount of data entry. I was busy. The Thomas Little file sat in its reclassified limbo, status pending review, and I assumed, in the distracted way you assume things when you're processing 100 other tasks, that someone at the local authority was looking into it. On November 2nd, I found another one. I wasn't even looking. A Year 9 student, Priya Chandrasekaran, had a minor administrative issue. Her parents had moved house, and the new address needed updating in the system. Standard procedure. I pulled up the Year 9 enrollment roster to make the edit, and as I was scrolling to find her entry, my eye caught on a name I didn't recognize. Oliver Marsh. Year 9, Form Group 9B, under Mr. Hennessy. I don't know why this name stopped me. I scroll past hundreds of names every day, and most of them pass without friction, because most of them correspond to students I've processed paperwork for, students whose names I've seen on attendance sheets and assessment reports and permission slips for field trips. Oliver Marsh didn't have that frictionless quality. The name felt inert. It sat on the screen without connecting to anything in my memory. I checked Mr. Hennessy's attendance register. Oliver Marsh was not on it. Mr. Hennessy's form group had 21 students. The enrollment roster listed 22. I should have reclassified the record and sent it to Mr. Alderton. That's what the protocol now was, apparently. But instead, I opened Oliver Marsh's enrollment file, and it was all there. Full record, date of birth, address, parents, emergency contact, enrollment from Year 7, attendance history, academic transcript, a school photograph of a boy with dark hair and glasses, maybe 13 or 14, looking slightly to the left of the camera, the way children sometimes do when they're told to look straight ahead and their body doesn't quite comply. I sat in my chair and I looked at that photograph and I felt the same thing I'd felt looking at Thomas Liddell's photograph, the same quiet pull of responsibility for a child who existed in our systems and nowhere else. And then I felt something new, something colder. I felt a pattern. I did not email Mr. Hennessy. I did not call Linda. Instead, I did something I probably shouldn't have done, which was to run a complete cross-reference of the entire enrollment roster against every active attendance register in the school. It took me 3 days, working late after the office closed. I told my wife I was catching up on the half-term data entry, which was partly true. Every evening, I sat in my windowless office with the desk radio playing quietly, and I matched names, one by one, enrollment to attendance, green for confirmed, red for discrepancy. I worked through all 824 students on the roster, form group by form group, year by year. I found 6. Thomas Liddell, Year 12. Oliver Marsh, Year 9. Abigail Dunn, Year 8. Samuel Okafor, Year 11. Maisie Brennan, Year 10. Eloise Tan, Year 13. 6 students on the enrollment roster who did not appear on any attendance register. 6 students with complete records, enrollment forms, attendance histories, academic transcripts, school photographs, who no form tutor recognized or reported as missing. 6 students whose status in the database was active, whose records showed no withdrawal, no transfer, no exclusion, no death. 6 students who, as far as anyone at Belfield Grange Academy could tell, had never existed. I printed out all 6 enrollment files. I laid them on my desk in a row. 6 photographs of children at various ages, in various year groups, all wearing the Belfield Grange uniform, all looking out at me with the bland, cooperative expressions that school photographs always seem to capture. I looked at them for a long time. Then I put them in a folder, put the folder in my bag, and went home. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed next to my wife, and I stared at the ceiling, and I tried to think of a rational explanation. A database error, replicated 6 times across 6 different year groups. A legacy issue from a previous data migration. Some old system feeding ghost records into the new one. A prank, even. Though I couldn't imagine who would go to the trouble of creating 6 complete student files, including photographs, for students who didn't exist. The photographs were the part I couldn't get past. Everything else, the enrollment forms, the transcripts, the attendance histories, could theoretically be fabricated or corrupted. but the photographs were of real children. Someone had stood in front of a camera and had their picture taken. Those children had been real, at least for the duration of a camera flash. The next morning, I went to see Mr. Alderton. I brought the folder. I showed him the 6 files, and I explained, as calmly and methodically as I could, what I'd found. I said I understood that the Thomas Liddell case had been referred to the local authority, but that I'd since discovered 5 additional students in the same situation, and that I felt this warranted more immediate attention. Mr. Alderton looked through the files. He spent maybe 2 minutes on them, which was less time than I'd hoped. Then he closed the folder and handed it back to me and said, "Marcus, I appreciate your diligence. I really do. But what you found here is almost certainly a data integrity issue, probably left over from the 2019 system migration. I'll ask Linda to run a full audit of the database, and we'll get these records cleaned up. In the meantime, I'd prefer it if you didn't continue this particular line of investigation on your own. It's not really within your remit, and I don't want parents getting wind of some kind of record-keeping scandal when there's a perfectly mundane explanation." I nodded. I said I understood. I went back to my office and I sat at my desk and I looked at the folder of 6 files and I thought about the phrase "perfectly mundane explanation." It's a cousin of "these things happen." It's the sound of a door closing. I should tell you about the 2019 system migration because Mr. Alderton's explanation wasn't unreasonable. In 2019, Belfield Grange switched from an older student management system called ParentView to a newer platform called ScholarSync. The migration had been messy. Records had been duplicated, fields had been mapped incorrectly. A handful of students had ended up with 2 entries in the new system. It had taken Linda and me most of that autumn to clean it up. So the idea that some corrupted records from the old system had survived in ScholarSync wasn't absurd. But I checked. I went into the ScholarSync backend logs, which I have access to, because part of my job involves troubleshooting data issues, and I looked at the creation dates for each of the 6 enrollment records. Thomas Liddell's record had been created on September 1st, 2020. Oliver Marsh's on September 1st, 2021. Abigail Dunn's on September 1st, 2020. Samuel Okafor's on September 1st, 2022. Maisie Brennan's on September 1st, 2021. Eloise Tan's on September 1st, 2019. None of them had been migrated from the old system. They'd all been created directly in ScholarSync on the first day of their respective academic years, and they'd all been created by the system administrator account, which is a generic login used by Linda and by me, and, theoretically, by anyone who's been given the credentials. I went to Linda. I showed her the creation logs. I asked her if she remembered creating any of these records. She looked at the logs carefully, more carefully than Mr. Alderton had looked at the files, and she said no, she didn't remember creating them, but that didn't necessarily mean anything, because she creates dozens of enrollment records at the start of every academic year, and she doesn't remember each individual one. "But look at the names," I said. "Do you recognize any of these students?" She looked at the names. She shook her head. "And doesn't that strike you as odd?" I asked. "You've been here 11 years. You know virtually every student by name. 6 students with complete records, and you don't recognize a single one?" Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus, what exactly are you suggesting?" I didn't know what I was suggesting. That was the problem. I had a folder full of records for students who didn't exist, and I had no framework for what that meant. I wasn't suggesting a conspiracy or a cover-up or anything that had a shape I could point to. I was just saying that the records were there and the students weren't, and that someone should care about that more than anyone seemed to. "I'm suggesting we report it properly," I said. "Not as a data error, as a safeguarding concern. If these are real children..." They're not real children, Linda said. They're database entries. There's a difference. They have photographs. Linda paused at that. I could see her thinking. Then she said, stock photos, placeholder images from the old system. It's not uncommon for... They're wearing our uniform, I said. The Belfield Grange tie. These aren't stock photos, Linda. She didn't have an answer for that. She looked at me, and for just a second I saw something in her expression that might have been fear, and then it was gone, replaced by the calm, slightly tired look of a professional who has decided that a problem is not her problem. I'll raise it with Mr. Alderton, she said. Let's let the leadership team handle it. I went back to my office. I opened the folder and I looked at the 6 photographs again. 6 children wearing the Belfield Grange uniform. 6 children with names and dates of birth and home addresses and academic histories. 6 children who no one remembered. I want to be clear about what I did next, because this is where I know I crossed a line, professionally speaking. I took the home addresses from the 6 enrollment files and I looked them up. I did this on my personal phone, not on the school's computer, because I had a feeling by then that my use of the school's systems was being noticed. Thomas Liddell, 14 Dunmore Road. Linda had already established that this address didn't exist. The street ends at number 12. I confirmed this on Google Maps. The street is a short residential road in the housing estate north of the school, 12 semi-detached houses on each side, and then it ends at a brick wall beyond which is the car park of a Tesco Express. There is no number 14. Oliver Marsh, 7 Sycamore Close. This address did exist. I drove past it on my way home from work. It was a perfectly ordinary house with a blue front door and a small garden. I sat in my car across the street for a few minutes, feeling foolish and slightly frightened, and then I drove home. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't know what I would have said. Abigail Dunn, 22 Park Lane. This was a real address, but when I looked it up, it was listed as a commercial property, a dental surgery. It had been a dental surgery for at least 10 years, according to the practice's website. Samuel Okafor, Flat 3, 19 Greenhill Road, real address. A block of flats near the town center. I didn't visit. Maisie Brennan, 45 Ashworth Street. Real address. I drove past it. An ordinary terraced house. Eloise Tan, 8 Birchwood Avenue. This address didn't exist. Birchwood Avenue has odd numbers on one side and even on the other, but it skips from number 6 to number 10. There is no number 8. The gap between the 2 houses where number 8 should be is occupied by a narrow alleyway leading to the back of a row of garages. So, of 6 addresses, 2 didn't exist at all. 1 was a commercial property, and 3 were apparently real residential addresses. I don't know what conclusion to draw from this. I'm recording it because it's what I found. What happened next is that nothing happened for about 3 weeks. November turned into December. The school was busy with mock exams and Christmas preparations. I did my job. I processed data. I did not look at the 6 files again, although I kept the folder in my desk drawer, and I was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound that no one else can hear. A faint, persistent frequency that sits just below the threshold of conversation. On December 5th, I was entering mock exam results into ScholarSync when I noticed that Thomas Liddell's record was gone. Not reclassified, not archived, gone. I searched for his name in every way the system allows. By surname, by student number, by date of birth, and returned 0 results. I checked the audit trail, which logs every deletion and modification made to the database. There was no record of his file being deleted. There was no record of his file ever having existed. The audit trail showed 823 enrollment records created over the past 5 years, not 824. Thomas Liddell had been removed from the system so thoroughly that even the log of his removal had been removed. I went to my desk drawer and opened the folder. The printout of Thomas Liddell's enrollment file was still there. His photograph, his transcript, his address, his parents' names. I was holding the only remaining evidence that he had ever been in our system at all. I checked the other 5. Oliver Marsh was still in the database. Abigail Dunn was still there. Samuel Okafor, Maisie Brennan, Eloise Ton. All still present. Only Thomas Liddell had been removed, and he'd been removed completely, as if the system had been scrubbed. I went to Linda. I said, "Thomas Liddell's record is gone." She looked at me. "Who?" "Thomas Liddell," I said. "The year 12 student, the first one I found, the one whose mother's phone was disconnected, and whose address doesn't exist." Linda's expression was blank, not hostile, not evasive, blank. The look of someone who genuinely does not know what you're talking about. "Marcus, I'm not sure I follow," she said. "Which student are you referring to?" "We discussed this," I said. "In October. You called his mother's number and it was disconnected. You called St. Anne's and they had no record of him. You told me you'd raise it with Mr. Alderton." "I think you might be mixing something up," Linda said, very gently, in the tone people use when they think you might be unwell. "I don't remember any conversation like that." I stood in her doorway and I felt something shift, not in the room, not in Linda, but in the distance between what I knew and what I could prove, because I could prove that I had a printout in my desk drawer, but I couldn't prove the conversation we'd had, or the phone calls she'd made, or the expression on her face when I'd pointed out that the photographs showed children in Belfield Grange uniforms. Those things had happened in the space between 2 people, and now one of those people was telling me, with complete sincerity, that they hadn't. "Never mind," I said. "I think you're right. I'm probably mixing it up." I went back to my office. I sat down. I opened the folder and I looked at Thomas Liddell's photograph and I said his name out loud, quietly, not because I thought it would accomplish anything, but because I needed to hear it exist in the air, needed to confirm that the syllables still worked, that they still referred to something. Then I took the folder out of my desk drawer and I took it home. I put it in the filing cabinet in my study, the one with the lock. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anyone. I understood by then that telling people was not going to produce the results I wanted. Over the Christmas holiday, I thought about it constantly. I tried to research whether other schools had experienced similar database anomalies. I searched online for cases of phantom student records, for data migration errors that had created fictional enrollment files, for any precedent that might explain what I'd found. I found nothing relevant. I found a few articles about schools that had inflated their enrollment numbers to receive more funding, but that was fraud, and it was the opposite of what was happening at Belfield Grange. No one was claiming these students existed. Only the records claimed it, and the records were being systematically dismantled. I also thought during that holiday about the possibility that I was wrong. I want to be honest about that. I lay on the sofa on Boxing Day while my wife watched television, and I constructed the most charitable interpretation I could. Perhaps Thomas Liddell was a real student who had attended Belfield Grange years ago, and whose record had been accidentally duplicated and assigned an active status through some glitch. Perhaps Linda's confusion was genuine, and my memory of our conversation was faulty. Memory is unreliable, I know this. Perhaps the photographs were from some test batch generated during the system setup, using images of students from other schools that had somehow been associated with fictional enrollment files. Perhaps. I built the whole structure, and I examined it, and it held together in places, but it couldn't account for the fact that there were 6 of them, across different year groups and different enrollment years, each with a complete and internally consistent record, each unknown to every teacher in the school. Term resumed on January 6th. I went back to work. I logged into ScholarSync and I checked the 5 remaining records. Oliver Marsh was gone. Same as before. No search results, no audit trail, no trace. I checked the others. Abigail Dunn, Samuel Okafor, Maisie Brennan, Eloise Tan, still present. But the enrollment roster now showed 822 active students, not 824. 2 had been removed, and the system had adjusted seamlessly around the gap, the way water closes over a stone. I opened my bag and took out the folder from home. Oliver Marsh's printout was still there. His photograph, his dark hair and glasses, his face turned slightly left. I looked at it, and I thought, I am holding a picture of a boy that no computer in this building acknowledges. And I felt, for the first time, genuinely afraid. I need to tell you about what happened with Abigail Dunn, because it's different from the others, and it's the part that I come back to most often when I'm trying to understand what's happening. In mid-January, before her record disappeared, and I knew it would disappear, I was checking daily by then, I decided to look more closely at her file. Abigail Dunn, Year 8. Form Group 8A, date of birth July 19, 2012. Home address 22 Park Lane, the dental surgery. I'd noted that before and moved on, but now I looked at her attendance record in detail. According to the system, Abigail Dunn had attended Belfield Grange from September 2023. She'd been in Year 7 for 1 year and was now in Year 8. Her attendance record for Year 7 showed her present on approximately 180 out of 190 school days, with absences scattered across the year in a pattern that looked completely normal. A few days in November, probably a cold, a day in February, a couple of days in June. She had marks in every subject. Her Year 7 report, which was stored as a PDF in the system, described her as a conscientious and thoughtful student who contributes well in class discussions. It was signed by her form tutor, Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves is a real person. He teaches geography. He's been at Belfield Grange for 7 years. He had been the form tutor for 7A in the 2023 to 24 academic year, which is exactly when Abigail Dunn's record says she was in that form group. I went to see Mr. Greaves. I was careful. I didn't mention phantom records or missing students or any of the things that I knew would make me sound like someone who needed to be handled gently. I said I was doing a routine records check and I needed to confirm some details about his form group from the previous year. Of course, he said. What do you need? I'm looking at the Year 7 report for a student called Abigail Dunn, I said. Your signature is on it. I just wanted to check that you remember her. Mr. Greaves thought for a moment. He had the look of a teacher who is trying to place a name among the hundreds of students who pass through his care. Then he said, Abigail Dunn. Yes, I think... No, actually, I'm not sure. What does she look like? I showed him the photograph from her file. He looked at it for a long time. I feel like I should know her, he said, but I can't place her. Is she still at the school? That's what I'm trying to determine, I said. Sorry I can't be more help, he said. You know how it is. You see so many faces. You see so many faces. Another door closing. But what struck me was what he'd said before, that I feel like I should know her. Not I don't know her. Not I've never seen her. He felt like he should know her, as if the connection was there, somewhere, but the pathway to it had been blocked or eroded, like a road that's been left to grow over until you can barely tell it was ever a road. I checked Abigail Dunn's record again the next morning. It was still there, but something had changed. The Year 7 report, the one with Mr. Greaves's signature, the one that described Abigail as conscientious and thoughtful, was gone. The PDF was no longer attached to her file. In its place was a blank field, and her attendance record for the current academic year, which had previously shown a string of absences that I'd taken as evidence of her simply not being present, had been replaced with a completely empty grid. No marks at all. Not absent, not present. Just empty, as if the year hadn't happened to her yet, as if time itself had stopped recording her. I printed everything I could. I printed it, and I added it to the folder, and I took the folder home, and I locked it in my filing cabinet. I was building an archive of a person who was being unbuilt, and I was doing it as fast as I could because I could feel the window closing. Abigail Dunn's record disappeared from ScholarSync on January 23rd. I should say that by this point, I had considered going to the police. I had considered it seriously. 6 children. Well, 3 now, in the system. 6 in my folder. With complete records at a state school, not recognized by any teacher, not present in any classroom, with addresses that were either non-existent or connected to properties where no child lived. The safeguarding implications alone should have been enough to justify a call to the local authority-designated officer, if not the police directly. But what would I say? I have printouts of enrollment records for children who don't appear to exist. The school's database has been altered to remove them, and no one who works at the school remembers them. And I, the assistant registrar, am the only person who believes they were ever real. I could hear how it would sound. I could hear the careful, practiced sympathy of whoever took the call. I could hear the phrase data integrity issue being used again, this time by someone with actual authority. And I could hear, underneath all of that, the faint sound of my credibility evaporating. I didn't call the police. I should have. I tell myself that now, and I believe it, but I also know why I didn't, and the reason is not flattering. The reason is that I was more afraid of being disbelieved than I was of whatever was happening to those children. I chose my own comfort and my own reputation over the possibility that 6 young people had been somehow erased from existence, and that I was the only person who'd noticed. I chose it, and I have to live with that. And I am telling you about it now, because if I'm going to be precise, I need to be precise about my own failures too. February came. Samuel Okafor's record disappeared on the 4th, Maisie Brennan's on the 11th. One by one, quietly, without audit trail, without anyone noticing or commenting or sending a concerned email. The enrollment roster ticked downward, 821, 820. The system absorbed each absence seamlessly. Class sizes adjusted, timetables rebalanced. It was as if the school itself was a living document that was being edited in real time, each deleted student a sentence removed from a paragraph that then restructured itself to hide the gap. By Valentine's Day, only Eloise Tan remained in the system. Year 13, the oldest of the 6. Her record had been created on September 1st, 2019, the earliest of any of them. She'd been in the database for over 6 years. She had a full set of GCSE results, predicted A-level grades, a UCS application. I found her personal statement in the system, a document in which she wrote about her passion for marine biology and her experience volunteering at a local aquarium. It was a good personal statement. It was specific and personal, and it mentioned a childhood memory of visiting the Natural History Museum and standing in front of the blue whale model and feeling, for the first time, the immensity of the ocean. I read it twice. I read it 3 times. I read it, and I thought, this was written by a real person. This is a real person's memory. You cannot fabricate the specific quality of a child standing in a museum and feeling small. You cannot generate that in a database migration error. I printed it. I added it to the folder. On February 19th, I checked Scholar Sync and Eloise Tan was gone. All 6 were gone now. The enrollment roster showed 819 active students. No one had said anything. No teacher had reported a missing student. No parent had called. No class had an empty seat. The school operated exactly as it had before, except that 6 children had been removed from its records and, apparently, from the memory of everyone who worked there. Except me. I want to talk about what that feels like because I think it matters. It feels like standing in a room where everyone else is looking at a painting, and you're the only one who can see that the painting has changed. Not dramatically. It's not as if the Mona Lisa has been replaced with a blank canvas. It's more like a figure in the background has been painted over, and the colors have been blended so carefully that you can only tell something is missing if you remember exactly what was there before. And you do remember. You remember with perfect clarity. But the painting is right there on the wall, and everyone else can see it, and it doesn't have the figure in the background, and they're all looking at you as if you're the one who's seeing things. That's what it feels like. It's not dramatic. It's quiet and grinding, and it makes you doubt yourself in ways that are difficult to recover from. March arrived. I continued to check Scholar Sync every morning, looking for new anomalies. I ran the enrollment roster against the attendance registers once a week, looking for names that didn't match. I found nothing. The 6 were gone, and no new ones had appeared, and I began to wonder if whatever had happened was over. A finite event, bounded in time, that had run its course. I was wrong, but I didn't learn that until April. On April 3rd, I was in the staff room during morning break. I rarely go to the staff room because I prefer the quiet of my office, but the kettle in the office had broken and I needed coffee. I was standing by the counter, waiting for the machine to finish, when I heard 2 teachers talking at the table behind me. Ms. Pettigrew, who teaches English, and Mr. Salinas, who teaches art. They were talking about coursework. Ms. Pettigrew was saying that she had a Year 11 student whose English language controlled assessment was outstanding, the best she'd seen in years, and she was trying to decide whether to put it forward for moderation as an exemplar piece. They were talking about this student with enthusiasm and specificity. They mentioned the student's analysis of a particular poem, the quality of the writing, the maturity of the argument. They mentioned the student by name. The name was Ravi Kapoor. I don't know why this name caught my attention. I'd heard hundreds of student names spoken in that staff room over the years, and most of them passed through me without resistance. But something about the way Miss Pettigrew said Ravi Kapoor made me stop. Maybe it was the same quality I'd noticed when I first saw Oliver Marsh's name on the enrollment roster. An absence of friction, a name that should have connected to something in my memory and didn't. I went back to my office and I looked up Ravi Kapoor in Scholar Sync. He was there. Year 11, Form Group 11D under Mrs. Patterson. Full enrollment record. Date of birth, address, parents, academic transcript. A school photograph of a boy with dark eyes and a serious expression. Status, active. I checked Mrs. Patterson's attendance register. Ravi Kapoor was on it. Present. Marked present that very morning. I exhaled. I told myself I was being paranoid. Here was a student with a record and an attendance mark and a teacher who knew him by name and was praising his work. Whatever was wrong with the other 6, it wasn't wrong with Ravi Kapoor. I closed the file and I went back to work. But over the next few days, I couldn't shake it. I couldn't shake the way his name had sounded. Or rather, the way it had felt, like a word in a language I almost understood but didn't quite. So, on April 7th, I did something I'd never done before. I went to see him. Year 11 had English language in room 14 on Monday afternoons. I knew this from the timetable. I walked to room 14 at 1:15, just before the lesson was due to start, and I stood in the corridor and I watched the students file in. I had Ravi Kapoor's photograph on my phone. I was going to look at each student as they entered and match them to the photograph and confirm, visually, that Ravi Kapoor was a real student who walked through real corridors and sat in real chairs, and I would feel foolish and relieved, and I would go back to my office and stop doing this. 26 students entered room 14. I checked each face against the photograph. None of them was Ravi Kapoor. Ms. Pettigrew arrived and the door closed. I stood in the corridor for a moment, my phone in my hand, his photograph still on the screen. Then I walked to the main office, and I asked the receptionist, Jane, if she could check the attendance register for 11D, Mrs. Patterson's form group. She brought it up on her screen. "What am I looking for?" she asked. "Ravi Kapoor," I said. "Can you tell me if he was marked present this morning?" She scrolled through the register. Ravi Kapoor. Yes, here he is. Marked present at 8:50. And he's in Ms. Pettigrew's English language class right now? Period 5? Jane checked the timetable. Yes, 11D English language, room 14, period 5. "Thank you," I said. I went back to my office. He was marked present. He was timetabled for the class. But he wasn't in the room. I had watched every student enter, and he wasn't among them, which meant either I had somehow failed to recognize him from his photograph, which was possible, but unlikely given that I had been looking specifically and carefully, or he was present in the system and absent from reality, and the system was winning. I didn't go back to room 14. I didn't ask Miss Pettigrew about Ravi Kapoor. I was afraid of what I would find, not that she wouldn't know him, because she clearly did. She'd been praising his work in the staff room just days earlier, but that her knowledge of him would be untethered from anything physical. That she would remember his essays but not his face. That she would have marked his work but never seen him handed in. That the system in which he existed would be so complete and so convincing that no one would think to ask whether the boy himself was actually there. Or I was afraid of the other possibility, which was that he was there and I simply couldn't see him. That the thing wrong with the system was not the system, but me. I'm going to tell you about the next part carefully because it's where the ground becomes least stable under my feet, and I want you to be able to judge for yourself how much weight to give it. On April 14th, I went into ScholarSync to check on Ravi Kapoor's record. It was still there, still active, still complete. But something was different. His school photograph had changed. Not dramatically. It was the same boy. Dark eyes, serious expression, Belfield Grange uniform. But the photograph was different. In the original, which I had saved on my phone, he was looking directly at the camera. In the new version, he was looking slightly to the left. The angle of his head was different. The lighting was different. It was a different photograph of the same person. I compared the two images on my phone screen side by side. The difference was unmistakable. The system had swapped one photograph for another, and if I hadn't saved the original, I would never have known. I checked the other records, not the original 6. Those were all gone. But the records of other students, randomly, scrolling through the roster and opening files and looking at photographs. I don't know what I was looking for. I think I was looking for more changes, more subtle adjustments, more evidence that the system was alive in some way I couldn't articulate. I didn't find anything. Or rather, I found something I couldn't be sure about. A Year 7 student named Chloe Fernandez, whose photograph I thought I remembered having a slightly different background. A lighter blue, maybe, but which now showed a standard gray. I wasn't sure. I hadn't saved her original photograph. I had no basis for comparison. That's the insidious thing, you see. Unless you've already saved a copy of something, you can't prove it's changed. And you can't save a copy of everything. The system is too large, and I am one person, and the asymmetry between what the system can alter and what I can preserve is overwhelming. I started printing more. Every day, I would select a random handful of student records and print them. Photograph, enrollment details, attendance summary, and take them home and file them. My wife asked me why I was bringing so much paper home, and I said it was a backup project in case the school's servers went down. She accepted this. She's not a suspicious person by nature, and she trusts me, and I felt guilty about that trust because I was using it to hide something from her that I didn't know how to explain. By the end of April, my filing cabinet at home contained printouts of approximately 200 student records. I had created a physical archive of Belfield Grange Academy's enrollment data, a shadow system that existed in paper and ink,